Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Smith. I am the Consultation Manager for the Eureka 3D Marine Seismic Survey. And this is the fifth of our webinar series related to the Eureka survey. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. We've got a few slides to go through, which I'll go through as quickly as I can. And then an opportunity for people to raise questions through the Q&A function. If you'd like to try that function, you can now. It should just be at the top of your screens. And of course, if there are questions throughout the presentation, please just drop those questions into the Q&A. So for today, we're going to cover a few bits and pieces, but we'll start with just an update for anybody who's new to this project. So we see we've got a few names that I don't recognise online, so we'll just do a little bit of background on what is the Eureka 3D survey. So Eureka is the name of a proposed survey in the Perth Basin, the map there that you can see on the screen. So seismic surveys, for those who are unfamiliar, are a technique used to explore and map the subsurface of the ocean floor. And in this case, we're looking for geological formations, some number of kilometres, in fact, down under the seabed. And just some operational details that we have around the activity, being that the earliest start time of the activity is the 1st of January 2025. The latest finish is the 31st of December 2026, and so that's a 24-month window, but that window has been narrowed to a preferred timing of February or March in either of the years 25 or 26. The survey duration now, total time for the vessel on the water, will be 40 days, and the maximum acquisition days within that 40 is 30 days. Everything being equal, if we had perfect conditions, it is possible that this survey will be a lot shorter than that 30 days, but 30 days is what we're making allowance for. As I said at the start, this is the fifth webinar in our series. Those webinars are all available online. I should have mentioned at the start that this webinar is also being recorded and will be published online as well on our website and on our YouTube channel. On that website, you'll find a lot of information about the survey that we've been publishing as soon as it's become available, and indeed changing as circumstances have changed over the last few months. And they include such things as a description of activity, information summaries, the preliminary impact assessment, the draft copies of our full impact and risk assessments, and the control measures, which effectively work as the conditions of approval that we set for ourselves to protect the marine environment. So all of that information is available online now. We've been out consulting since the 4th of February, and we have had, I've got a computer telling me it needs to update. Let's just cancel that. We have been out consulting with people since the 4th of February 2023, and we've had a lot of consultation undertaken. I think we're up over 800 relevant persons now have been identified and communicated with. So that's quite a large number of people that have been involved in and inputting into the process and inputting into the preparation of the environment plan. And all of that input helps us improve the predictive quality of our assessments, because we're able to interpret information that we have with the community, and also to receive information that we otherwise wouldn't have had. So thank you to all of those people who have been involved in this process to date, either by providing us information or by providing objections and claims to our proposals. We are reaching the point, and likely to reach the point where in the next few weeks, where we believe we have provided sufficient information to complete we have sufficient information to complete our environmental assessments and conclude the pre-submission consultation. That doesn't mean that consultation stops. There's a further opportunity for people to voice their concerns directly through to NOPSEMA through a public comment process that we will be seeking occur sometime in the new year, possibly towards the end of January is our current timing. And we encourage people to use that process through NOPSEMA's website if you are dissatisfied with our consultation process or dissatisfied with any of the outcomes, or would otherwise like to make comment directly to the regulator. That's what that process is for. And we do encourage relevant persons to self-identify at any time pre-submission, throughout public comment and post-acceptance as well. Just a bit of a recap on the activity design. So we do now have one survey timing window, and that timing window has changed as we've gone through our assessments. The sort of checkered story of it, the quick story of it, has been that we initially were looking at February, March, based on some feedback from DPIRD and from some other community members. We actually moved that timing through to I think we moved it through to April, May. There was subsequently some issues associated with that timing regarding fishing activity. So we looked at the July, August window. That's not good for weather. And then subsequently there was some changes to the conservation management areas, let's call it, for protected species, which meant that window was no longer suitable, and we've arrived back at the February-March window as being the window that currently we believe has the least environmental impact. There's a couple of things that we've maintained over the last little while that are worth reiterating, which is a 9.2 exclusion zone around Beagle Island. This protects the largest population of Australian sea lions in WA, and so that's their behavioural threshold, which is the reason we've picked that number. Behavioural effect threshold, I should say, for sound. And we've put a 300-metre exclusion zone around all around the 12-metre contour of aggregated reefs. The larger areas, I think, are known as Leander Reef, but it's all the associated reefs within that contour, within that planning area. And so you can see on the pictures there on the slide, the area we started with, and the area that we have now narrowed to, with those exclusion zones marked within it. All of those maps are available online if you want to zoom in and see those in a bit more detail. So what have we done so far? This is actually a bit of a reiteration of the consultation efforts we've undertaken, including raising awareness about the project. For those of you that are involved in offshore petroleum activities extensively, you'll know that over the last 12 months there's been some court cases which have driven us to expand our consultation efforts quite a lot. And we do believe that we've managed to we've implemented a process that has been capable of finding all relevant persons. And as I say, we've had a number of people come forward. I won't go through the full list, but suffice to say, we've done an awful lot with a number of different trips up the coast and a number of different engagements with a lot of groups over that time. I should just reiterate on this slide also that we did make a promise that we would provide an opportunity to come to others to meet with us in person by coming back up the coast and meeting with people who wanted to have a discussion with us prior to submission. So we're looking at the third week in January as the opportunity to put your hand up and have a one-on-one meeting with myself and the members of the team. So one of the things that we're going to be carrying through public comment is the compensation protocol for commercial fishers. This is something we put up right at the start of our consultation effort, and it's to be clear that we recognise that seismic surveys, they do have an impact. And what's important to acknowledge, it's really important that we acknowledge that impact. And so there are times where we know quite precisely what the impacts are, and there are times that we are less certain about what the impacts are. The compensation protocol is designed for those occasions where, despite our best efforts to work on the water cooperatively with people, we do recognise that historical fishing activity can mean that people are displaced from areas that they would otherwise access. And so in those instances where avoidance is not possible, it's important to have a compensation protocol so that we can meet our aim, which is that no commercial fisher should be worse off as a result of the activities proposed by Pilot Energy. So this slide really just talks about what we're doing with the compensation protocol. And for those of you that aren't aware, there is pretty much a national standard that started here up in the northwest of Western Australia with the National Energy Resources Australia Compensation Protocol, or Adjustment Protocol as it's called. And that was agreed by a number of fishing associations that were all relevant up in the northwest of the state. And it caters for compensation for things such as loss of gear, displacement, meaning claims for increased variable costs, and variation in catch per unit effort based on historical averages. And it provides an evidence-based process for people to submit claims, for them to be assessed by an independent person. There's a dispute mechanism built into that protocol if there is the instance of a dispute. And it's been pretty well tried and tested now, and is generally the industry standard we try to adopt. Of course, the protocol as it currently is was primarily written for the northwest of Western Australia, which is not the Midwest coast. And so different species, different fishing methods need to be considered. And so we've made a commitment to basically publish this the draft, if you like. Let's call it a draft now rather than the endorsed version. But we're publishing the endorsed version as a draft and inviting commercial fishers to have a look at that protocol and the schedules that are associated with it, so that you can understand how it will operate. We have also engaged the Western Rock Lobster Council to formally review the protocol. And we're very happy that we're able to work with them on doing so. The NERA document itself, if it hasn't been uploaded to the website this afternoon, it will shortly be uploaded to our website. And by joining the call today, hopefully you've got my contact details, so you can write to me and request a copy if you can't seem to find it. But that is going to be made available. We wanted to cover a very common question that we're getting, which is associated with the seismic operations and the exclusion zone. So what actually happens on the water? And often we present this 2D image of an area, and it looks and appears as a blanket exclusion zone. So we see this question: will the whole area be blocked off during the duration of the survey? And so the answer to that is absolutely not. There's no blanket area. And what we've tried to do on this slide is show the sail lines in blue and in red for the different orientations, whether we're going north-south or south-north. And what you can see depicted on that in that image on the screen is the sort of black line that you can see is the seismic vessel with the streamers being towed behind it. And the oval shape around it is the exclusion area. And of course, that exclusion area is moving throughout the duration of the survey as it traverses along those intended lines. And I should note that those lines are currently still draft. We work on those lines all the way through to pretty much the day before we start acquisition, pretty much. Now, on that image, there is also the red kind of operational area that is this more square area, which is where the vessel and its streamers may be at other times, including line turns, any maintenance or equipment testing. But we have to make a commitment to NOPSEMA in our environment plan for all of our petroleum activities to be within that red polygon. So the 6 kilometre buffer there that you can see depicted narrows to a 3 kilometre radius around the vessel as we move into the shallower waters, where we will be using a different seismic surveying technique called ocean bottom nodes, which is where we place the hydrophones on the sea floor rather than tow the streamers. So with the absence of the streamers is the reason for the reduction in radius of an exclusion zone. And there will be other vessels out on the water to help manage this interface with other marine users. And we have made commitments to publish look-ahead notifications at 24, 48, and 72-hour notices. Typically what occurs is the lines will get numbered, and those numbered lines will be communicated to people in those at those intervals prior to us acquiring those lines. So we've got a few things that have changed within our assessment of the effects of seismic on rock lobsters, and it relates to a recent study undertaken by DPIRD. It's a really good study from what we can see, and I'd say certainly pushing forward the general body of knowledge and science about the effects of seismic on rock lobsters. Some of the findings very commensurate with what is seen with other studies associated with southern rock lobsters, but there are some notable differences as well. So this is a summary that we've prepared based on consultation that we've been undertaking with DPIRD, and so this is the current position as we understand it. And just very briefly to go through that science, it's associated with obviously the effect of seismic on western rock lobsters specifically. There were 200 lobsters used in the study. I think just slightly more than that were taken, and then 100 part of the control group and 100 part of the exposure group. And those lobsters were held in baskets along a line at that 5-meter water depth. Then essentially a typical seismic source was towed at a submerged depth of 2 meters above the middle of that line of baskets. And so the minimum exposure, as we understand it, for lobsters was 3 meters from the source. So those sound exposure levels are really important for us to understand. And the sound exposure levels were measured from a hydrophone that was positioned 2 kilometers away from the exposure site. The lobsters were then released after seismic testing, tagged and released after seismic testing had been complete. So a quick summary of the findings. The exposure group had a significantly greater righting time, meaning the time taken to turn back to their feet when laid on their back. And there were, of the recovered lobsters, there's a greater limb loss and overall poorer release behaviours, such as drifting, in comparison with more active release behaviours of the control group. The recapture rates were subsequently modelled to obtain estimates of the mortality over time. And so there was a 30% or approximate 30% reduction in recapture of the seismic exposure group compared to the control group. And that's that's after testing, and then sorry, I'll start again. 30% reduction in recapture of the seismic exposure group compared to the control group. Actually, the words on the slide aren't quite right. But basically, the study says there's no significance in the reduction after 36 days. And no difference thereafter up to 706 days from the exposure. And so this may indicate one or two things. It may indicate that there's a 30% increase in mortality of the exposed animals. And that's a really important point to note. It's the 30% increase in mortality is being modelled of the exposed animals within that first month. Not all animals, it's the exposed animals that we're talking about. And that it could equally indicate that actually there was essentially a catchability effect over that period as well. So a behavioural reaction, so a reluctance for the exposed lobsters to enter a pot. So that's one. It could be one of those two things. What we did find is that the findings are that any acute mortality may indicate that there's increased predation rates. Again, that's increased predation rates to those lobsters that were exposed because of those reduced defensive capabilities from the delayed righting. Our job as Pilot Energy and the environment team working on this environment plan is to then translate those studies to what we think that might mean in application to the Eureka survey. So clearly, first and foremost, it's a very relevant study. It's probably the most advanced study on rock lobsters now in the country. I think there are more studies coming out that will either confirm or otherwise these types of findings. And to be honest, the types of findings from this report were slightly more elevated than we might have originally anticipated, but not surprising when you consider the circumstances of the survey and the existing literature that's already available on the effect of seismic on rock lobsters. The experimental design meant that the hydrophone was not placed in a position that we were able to understand exactly what the exposure regime is. But that doesn't discredit the science at all. That just means we've got some different measurements that we need to work with. It might be good to do an experiment actually where so an additional piece of work where the hydrophones are at those exposure sites. So that's something that we'll go away and consider. The 3 meter exposure range for sub-lobsters in terms of as that relates to Eureka is that that's three times closer than will be experienced on our survey. And so what the action we undertook was to review our current impact management zone for rock lobsters, which is the 300 meter exclusion zone around the built up reef areas. And so that's the 12 meter contour plus 300 meters. And so we reviewed that and decided that our belief is that impact management zone with the 300 meter exclusion zone on that 12 meter contour, it remains adequate. We completely understand that there are still a number of uncertainties in the science. Whilst there are some things that we do know for certain, which is that seismic does not cause mortal effects to rock lobsters. There is clearly uncertainty in the impacts, and it's part of our commitment. We have to recognise that uncertainty as part of our commitment to ensure that impacts and risks from the survey are managed to an acceptable level. We had previously made a commitment to undertake we call it a transferability of knowledge piece of work, which is to ask the University of Tasmania to provide a view on how useful the research for southern rock lobsters would be in application to western rock lobsters, given that the extensive science that's been done on the southerns and the claims from fishers that the western rock lobsters are more, I think, more fragile is what we heard in some way. So we've been reconsidering the need for that study and discussing that with the Western Rock Lobster Council. We've come to a position where we think that we should proceed with that study. So we're just basically putting forward the final kind of dotting I's and crossing T's on executing that piece of work. I think the DPIRD study, above anything else, improves the case for further research, which is something we've always been committed to doing. If we go through this process of trying to resolve the uncertainties in the most cost-effective way, we fully recognise that it might end up with us having to undertake further research. And we will continue to work with DPIRD and industry associations and, of course, the research bodies who would be needed to undertake this type of work. To reveal if there is further research, for example, a larger sample size or some other parameter that we might want to look at that may lessen the levels of uncertainty. So this slide was just reiterating those exclusion zones that will remain in place. So it's about a 34 square kilometre area around our active source size. Just a final thing in terms of what happens next. From a consultation side of things, we've made a comprehensive and wide-reaching efforts to identify all persons. We'll be coming back up the coast for anybody who wants to meet with us one-on-one, and we do encourage you to reach out for a meeting if you're available in that third week of January. And if not, we can do an online meeting at other times. So do encourage you to do that prior to submission, and to raise any remaining objections and claims that you may have. From the environment plan side of things, we're now in the final processes of basically pulling together all of the information that we've been able to gather. We've had some really good feedback on our draft chapters. So the process now for us is to go away and update those, and essentially prepare a document that's ready for public comment. And that public comment, as I said earlier, we hope to undertake sometime towards, it's looking mid to late January is the earliest that will occur, and it may be later than that, but that giving you the earliest date is probably the best thing to do in this instance. So we've only got a short amount of time left for Q&A, but I'm happy to stay online and answer until people's questions are exhausted. Hopefully you've all got access to the Q&A function. And while people are writing those questions, I just want to thank everybody for their time in attending the webinar. And you know, if you don't feel able to answer a question in this forum, you know, we remain open to having those questions sent through to us at any time, and encourage you to go and have a look at the website for further information. So we'll just wait now and see if there's any questions that anybody would like to ask. A bit concerned possibly that the Q&A function isn't working now. Hope that it is. If not the Q&A function, possibly the chat function has been enabled. Oh, we got a question here. Excellent, Matt. Hi. You reference to the deeper study only mentioned sound, whereas you previously particle motion is the most important. How are they related? That's a great question. So particle motion is probably less well understood, and we have the way that we relate them in our impact assessment is that we use the sound pressure levels as essentially as a proxy for the impact thresholds. My understanding is that the current position of the science is I guess the jury's still out whether or not it is the sound pressure wave itself that's causing the effect on rock lobsters, or whether it's particle motion, or whether it's a combination of both of those things. The particle motion is the physical motion of particulates within the water that's causing the effect versus a pressure wave. At the moment, the thresholds that we have that are, I guess, most widely applied, and I would say are the most precautionary, are to apply the sound pressure thresholds. I believe there are some studies either underway or shortly, either shortly to be reported on or coming, that relate to measurements of particle motion as in terms of exposure experiments that have happened more recently. But I'm not 100% sure on where the status of those papers is, or what the status of those papers is. Helen, you've got a question here. What is the scientific basis for the size of the exclusion zone for the Australian sea lion? So Helen, when we undertook our sound exposure modelling, we model for a number of different receptors, because obviously different species receive sound in different ways at different levels, at different frequencies as well. And I think my recollection is correct here, that the number there was used because it was the behavioural threshold distance. So as long as the sound source, we stay away from those, that's a buffer that we've put around the Beagle Island to provide that, basically so that we know at the island where they most likely reside, that we won't have any behavioural threshold effects. And so that's the main basis as to why we selected that measure. And that is obviously not the only measure to protect Australian sea lions. So there's a number of measures in place also associated with our marine mammal management plans, where we're obviously observing for those sea lions as well. So let's assume that they do still want to forage and they go out to do that. We've got a number of protections in place above this, just the basic exclusion zone. And the other thing, of course, with the sea lions is to note the cultural significance of the sea lions to the traditional owners of the region, some of the traditional owners of the region. And so we're working with those traditional owners to find ways of protecting the cultural, or I suppose the spiritual value of the sea lions as well. So there'll be additional sets of measures in place to protect the sea lions. So thank you, Helen, for the question. Peter, there is a highway for seasonal pelagic species through this area that affects recreational users. Is there any research planned for the effects on pelagic species? I might have to take that question on notice, Peter, just to the environment that the science team are not with me just at the moment. But to my knowledge, there's no specific research planned at the moment associated with this survey. A lot of the science that we've been relying on in our impact assessments has been associated with the Northwest Shoals to Shore program research that was undertaken by Santos and Ames over a number of years now. I can't remember how long ago it was. I think 2017 through to 2018 or so, and so a lot of probably the latest and most relevant literature is related to the effects of sound on those types of species are from those papers. But Peter, if I could also commit to get back to you just in case that's not the case, I will go back to the team and see if there's anything that we've got planned in that area. Matt, you said, I'm encouraged by your comment. Oh, I've got to see more here about your comment to do further research. Given the knowledge of impacts from the DPIRD study, will you commit to working with Western Rock Lobster and DPIRD design and undertake a study on the actual effect of your survey on lobster, given you have a program of activities into the future? Look, so the short answer to that, we'll definitely commit to having those discussions, and we've always been committed to a pathway that has a component of a before-after control impact assessment, a BACI study that as part of that pathway. We fully acknowledge it may well be where we end up. I think it's important that we reiterate that there is a pathway to get there, meaning we've got to go through it. There might be a number of different bits of work, including the transferability study that is part of that pathway. And we're happy to sit down with the Western Rock Lobster Council and DPIRD to basically go through the process of scoping what such a study would be and figuring out how we can achieve it. The exact mechanics of doing studies like this, obviously I can't make a commitment right here, right now to confirming that we would undertake that study. Obviously, there's a lot of water that needs to go under the bridge to organise getting ready to make such a commitment. But we're very happy to sit down with Western Rock Lobster Council and DPIRD to figure out what the pathway is. We've still got, everything being equal, we've still got a good 12 months to be able to plan something. But that's not such a long time in research terms. So we do recognise that that if 2025 is the window, we do need to push the pedal down on getting that design, working what the scope is and getting that design in place. So hopefully that answers your question there, Matt. Yep, I think I've got any more there? I think I might have missed one. Leyland, I think I've missed one from here. So are there any compensation protocols for unavoidable impacts on recreational and or charter fishers? So charter fishers would fall into commercial. So people that rely on those types of things for income, that falls into the banner of commercial. We do recognise that the NERA protocol currently has can apply to charter fishers, but it's a really valid thing for us to review, I think, in the context of the Midwest. And so it may be that there's particular addendums that might need to be in place for charter fishers. Recreational fishers, compensations typically not offered for recreational fishers. And the main reason for that is the short duration of the survey and the ability for recreational fishers to have a bit more flexibility about where they undertake those fishing activities. So that's the main reason recreational doesn't fall into that category. But the commercial side of things is important because there are people relying on potentially relying on being able to have access to those areas at certain times of the year. The key to the compensation protocol, regardless of where it ends up, and hopefully through the review process, it will end up in a really good place. The key to the compensation protocol is having that evidence base that there has been activities in those areas in the past. That really is central to the kind of basis of how compensation or adjustments are made. I didn't actually see that question, Leyland, so I'm a little bit concerned I might have missed others. So just give me a moment here. Oh, Carrie Ann, I've missed one here from you. So happy to be corrected, but I thought you mentioned that the Xanadu research proved that seismic doesn't have mortal effects on lobsters. But could it be that the 30% of the lobsters that weren't captured died of the effects at a later point? So there's a couple of things there, and I am also happy to be corrected. I'm not a marine scientist, and there may be others on the call who might be able to answer this better than me. My understanding is the 30% was a modelled outcome. It would be the first thing to say, and then essentially there of all the studies that I've seen, I have never read any study that shows a mortal effect on rock lobsters. It's only sublethal effects, but those sublethal effects are permanent, we should say. So that the studies went to 365 days, and the effect hadn't changed. So to my knowledge, but I'm again happy to be corrected on that one, Carrie Ann, as well. And if there are other people on the call who want to chime in and help answer that question, then that would be, you're more than welcome to do that. I think I can take people off mute, although it might not be possible, but maybe it can. Have I missed any other questions in all of this? I've just seen a follow-up comment from Leyland. A lot of people also rely on the activities of recreational fishers. Absolutely, we do understand that. And again, a function of the very short amount of time in the year that we're going to be out there, and the ability for those fishers to be able to go to other locations. So hopefully from a shore side or a coastal side of things, it should be that those things are manageable and interference avoided. This Q&A function looks a bit weird on my screen at the moment, so I do hope that I'm answering all of the questions that I've seen come through, but yeah, I can't seem. It seems as though I've got to all of the questions, but my interface looks a bit strange. So I'll hang on the line for a couple of minutes. If there's any further questions or follow up, please do pop those into the chat. But yeah, if people don't have questions, then we'll be concluding the webinar shortly. And I thank you all again for your time. Much appreciated.